What is up, guys? Well, the year of 2024 is officially in our rear view mirror, and so that means it's time to look back at the last 365 days of films. So, per usual, if you're not a stranger to this channel, the way that I typically do these end of the year rankings is I give my most disappointing films, which we're going to do today, the most surprising films, the absolute worst films, the absolute best films. And then I also usually do a standalone ranking of just the horror films, and then we culminate this bitch with a big, massive ranking of every single new release that I watched in the calendar year, which as of right now sits at a number of 129. By the time I click the record button, it might well be over 130, but my God, every year I feel like I take it a little bit easier than I did the last year, and somehow I end up seeing even more films than I did the previous year. Nonetheless, today we're kicking off this entire end of the year ranking extravaganza with my top 10 most disappointing films of 2024. Now, disappointing does not necessarily mean the worst films of the year, though some of these will be towards the very bottom of my list when I eventually do it. Disappointing just means wherever my expectations were, these movies fell the furthest away from those when I actually saw them. So there's still some movies on here that I would give an overall positive review for, but I expected them to be outstanding. And some of these in here are just actually bad movies that I was really hoping were going to be good. So this is always one of my more favorite videos to do because it's a little bit more nuanced than best and worst. With that said, let me know your most disappointing films of 2024 down in the comment section below. Kicking off the list at number 10 is a movie that I did like, but I was expecting to love, and that is Bad Boys Ride or Die. I am a big fan of this franchise. I think that it's one of the best buddy cop franchises of all time. And I've been there to see every single one of these in the theater ever since I was a kid. So Bad Boys has always had a special place in my heart. And I was one of the people that absolutely loved the last film, Bad Boys for Life. To me, that was the best of the three, and that was a shocking surprise. That definitely made my most surprising list that year. And so I was expecting, since the same directors were coming back, that this was going to be on that level. And this ended up being my least favorite of the four, while still being a movie that overall I enjoyed. Now, it has a lot of great action. There was some really cool things where they created like a dolly for the camera that swung around on a swivel to get some first-person POV and then back onto Will Smith's face when they were doing a shootout. There was some really innovative stuff in there like we got in Bad Boys for Life. Of course, Martin Lawrence and Will Smith, their chemistry is just omnipresent. No matter what they're doing, there's always some bit of palpable awesomeness there because they just work so well together. But the story, seeing like a conspiracy plot in there where you got Joe Pantoliano's character getting dragged through the mud and they're trying to clear his name. Not the most interesting thing in the world to do, especially since that character is dead. So, his placement in the third film was actually a very surprisingly heartfelt thing. This one, I just didn't really feel much from it. But the biggest thing that let me down about this one was that I felt like the humor was extreme hit or miss and mostly landed on the miss. A lot of what they did with Martin Lawrence's character, I just didn't really like. They've continuously tried to push Martin Lawrence's character into this joke of him being just this over-the-hill guy that likes to snack and doesn't really want to have violence, and yet he's in these extremely violent movies over and over and over again. Like, they've been doing this since the second one with the whole woo-saw thing, and there's moments throughout the four films, really 2, 3, and 4, since they didn't try that in the first film, that the humor hits with that. And then there's times where it just feels like they're just pushing it too far and they're taking away from the bad boy side of Martin Lawrence's character. In this film, I think they went way too far with him staring at the nasty hot dogs and, all that different stuff. It just didn't quite work for me. So Bad Boys Ride or Die, I liked it, but it was my least favorite of the four, and I had much bigger hopes for it. Coming at number 9 is going to be Smile 2. Now, the first Smile was a film that I really had no expectations for. I was lucky enough to check out the world premiere when I went to Fantastic Fest for the first time, and that movie actually surprised me. It surprised me at how well it utilized its concept that was admittedly very derivative. And so because I was surprised quite a bit with that first film, I had higher expectations for this second one. A lot of the early reviews and early buzz was massive for this one, which was very surprising. I figured if nothing else, this would be like, hey, if you like the first one, you'll probably like the second one. Like, it's pretty good. It's along the same lines, but if you didn't like it, it's not going to be for you. That's what I assumed the buzz was going to be. But the buzz was like 3 times the film of the original, the greatest horror performance of the year. Parker Finn just delivered the greatest horror film of 2024. And I was like, wow, really? And so, like oftentimes, where I try to caution all of you guys to not let online chatter or early reviews affect your expectations, even my own reviews or early chatter, I fell victim to that, walked into this movie expecting it to be outstanding, and I thought that it was just good. I actually do prefer the first film slightly, but I rated them very similarly. I thought Naomi Scott was very good in this. I think that there was a number of sequences that were very creepy. And I think Parker Finn's direction certainly has increased in talent from the first film to the second film, and it was already impressive on one. So I really want to see what he does. I'm a little bummed that he's sticking around to do a third Smile film. I want to see him move on to other things. But narratively, it was kind of been there, done that. It's like the concept was already derivative, but they executed it well. Now it's derivative of its derivativeness. And my main issue with the film, it's hard to get specific with it without leaning into spoilers. So all I will say is they tried to pull a plot twist, and the plot twist just ended up frustrating the hell out of me versus surprising me or shocking me, all leading to a finale that I thought was incredibly predictable. Now, it's like the way that this movie had to end, but if you have an ending that feels like everybody knows where this is going to go, it's just the way that has to go. There's no other ending that makes sense for this film. You have to make the journey to get there a little bit better. So while a lot of people loved this movie, I found myself a bit disappointed with it. Coming at number 8 is going to be In a Violent Nature. This is the film where you essentially take the Friday the 13th concept, only you follow the perspective of the masked killer. Now, you have a totally different lore, a totally different killer here named Johnny, but aesthetically, he's very Jason Voorhees-esque. So you have a film that is you following the perspective of this silent masked killer as he stalks people through the woods and kills them one by one. And that sounded like a really cool creative concept to kind of bring something new to the slasher subgenre, which is an incredibly hard thing to do nowadays. Like, we've seen so many different slashers that try to do so many different things that bringing something wildly original to the subgenre is very tricky. And so I will give all the credit in the world that they found a way to do that. It stuck. It was something that was intriguing, that drew a lot of horror fans in, and they were successful enough that they're going to get a second chance to do it with In a Violent Nature too. And I hope that that movie ends up being a lot better than this one. Overall, I liked the movie okay. I did give it an overall positive review for the innovation and the creativity there, and it has one of the greatest kill scenes that I've ever seen in my life. Like, I did a top 30 kills not too long ago, and the yoga kill was on that list. So all the credit in the world for that. But beyond the kill scenes and beyond a little bit of the creative way that they are able to express the lore of what is going on just by the Johnny character overhearing conversations as he's stalking people, I thought the movie was incredibly boring. And they opened it up at Overlook Film Festival, where I saw this premiere, by kind of joking around that the movie might put you to sleep, which is a very strange way to pitch your movie to an audience that's about to watch it at very late at night. But what they were talking about is it kind of has this metronome quality to it, because so much of the film is just him walking through the woods with just ambient nature sounds. And it's just him stepping on leaves and grass going ch, 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 ch. So it very much has like that, like the alarm clocks that have the nature sounds that put people to sleep that have a hard time focusing. So, that very much was a struggle throughout the movie, as after watching films all day, and this was the last one late at night, it was a struggle. But even beyond that, it's just, you have the Friday the 13th films and you wonder, what does Jason Voorhees do when he's not on screen killing somebody? Well, he just walks around and stands and looks at people like that. That's not very interesting. So it was creative, it was innovative, it was interesting. It was mostly well executed, but I think the concept in and of itself is extremely limited when you have a silent killer. So we'll see what they do with In a Violent Nature 2. Maybe they'll be able to squeeze a little bit more out of the concept. The other side of it that was very disappointing was that every time you watch one of these film premieres at a film festival, the filmmakers themselves are typically in attendance, and they'll intro the film and then they'll follow it up with a Q&A. And I thought that the director's behavior during the Q&A was an extreme turnoff. Now, I say this every time I talk about this. I will give the guy the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was a few too many drinks in. Maybe he just had a little bit of nervousness about it, and so he was trying to be funny, and he ended up just kind of like stepping on himself a little bit. Maybe he just has one of those awkward sense of humors that just, if you don't know him, it kind of is a bit of a turnoff. I don't know. I don't want to make it out like the guy's a bad guy. I'm sure he's fine. But when you have a film like this, that was an extremely frustrating watch. And every single question that the audience is asking about, why did you choose to do this? Why did you choose to focus on this? Why did you choose to make this choice? And basically all of his answers boiled down to, oh, we did that to frustrate people. We did that to piss people off. We did that so that the film students and the pretentious movie crowd would get aggravated and the slasher crowd would get aggravated. We're just out to give the middle finger to everybody. That was kind of the attitude and the tone of every single answer he gave, which just came across as extremely pretentious to me. So that definitely colored the film even more in a negative light for me after I was already very much on the fence with it. But nonetheless, we'll see. I'm willing to put that aside and see if they can do a better job with the second film. Coming at number 7 is going to be Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, and I think that Guy Ritchie has been on a really interesting hot streak in this later part of his career. I think that he's made some interesting choices. You got movies like The Gentleman that I loved. You got movies like Wrath of Man that I had a really good time with. And so I had high expectations for what he was going to do next, but also the trailer just made this look like a really fun time. Just these really zany characters played by actors that I love. It's almost like a more fun version of Inglourious Bastards, where they're just going to take out the Nazis and have a blast doing it. And that's part of the movie, but the other 50% or more is just focused on these two characters in this little espionage plot that was not very interesting. So that really tanked the movie for me, where overall I didn't really enjoy it so much. I think that the side of the movie that I went for, which is this ministry of badasses, it was fun and it was cool, but it also just lacked some tension. It lacked some punch there, because they just kind of seemed like they were indestructible and they're just going to have a laugh and just shoot Nazis the entire movie. And so that got a little bit redundant after a while. And the espionage plot that they kept cutting to for the majority of the runtime, I just wasn't interested in. So this one disappointed me quite a bit. I was expecting to have a lot of fun with it, and I just ended up being bored throughout most of it. Coming in at number 6 is Kevin Smith's latest film, The 4:30 Movie. Now, this was not on my radar. This was not something that I heard any buzz or expectations about until the week that it released. And suddenly I saw a lot of people on Twitter saying, hey, don't sleep on this movie. This is Kevin Smith's best movie in years. It's such a heartwarming trip through nostalgia if you're a movie lover. And I started to get a little interested in it. And I went to go check this thing out, and I did not like it at all. Which I hate to say, because Kevin Smith is one of those filmmakers that I always want to root for. Like, he's a movie maker for movie fans, and it just bums me out when he makes something that I don't like, because I just want to champion that guy. I want to high five him every time he does something, but this just didn't work for me. You have a group of characters, these teenagers in high school back in the 80s, that are essentially spending an entire day at the Megaplex. And you have the main character that has a date that he is leading up to with the girl of his dreams at 4:30. And so it's a whole movie about these three friends going to see these fake movies at the movie theater and kind of having this bit of a coming of age story in the 80s that is very much semi-autobiographical of Kevin Smith. On paper, that sounds like I should love this movie. It sounds like it should be a shoo-in for my top 10. But I didn't think any of the jokes were funny. I didn't like any of the characters. I didn't find any of the fake movies to be entertaining or interesting. The pop culture references are very much in reference to movie making and TV making today. And I just found them to be so on the nose and just easy jokes, like low-hanging fruit, that they just did not work for me. Like, they're talking about Star Wars while they're outside in line, and somebody makes a joke essentially about how they should do like TV series and they should do all these different things. And they're like, Star Wars is never going to do that. Like, obviously kind of roasting Disney Plus. And I just didn't find it to be funny. It was like, yeah, because that's what they do now. And that was kind of the tone of all of those pop culture jokes. So this one sorely bummed me out. You know, it's only at number 6 because I didn't have a whole lot of hype leading up to it. It was like me being excited for about 2 days before I found it and then went, okay, that didn't quite work for me. But on paper, this should have been a movie that's very high on my list, and I found it to be extremely lackluster. Coming in at number 5 is going to be The Bikeriders, and this is another film that I figured would probably be one of those little dark horses that stuck its way up into my top 20 or so, because I love movies like this, retelling of true events where you have actors that I love in like this Sons of Anarchy type of situation. You have this motorcycle club that is ran by Tom Hardy. The main character, the rebel without a cause character, is played by Austin Butler, who is extremely hot right now after Elvis and Dune Part 2. And having kind of a period piece quality to it, of going back into the eras when motorcycle gangs were big. Like, this just seemed like a movie that I was going to eat up. And aside from some pretty good performances overall, aside from a couple of cool sequences where they're doing some criminal acts and stuff, I just found this movie to be a dud. Like, it's more of like a motorcycle gang hangout movie. It's just these dudes hanging out in their cuts, having conversations about stuff. And, it's one of those things where when you're making a movie that's adapted from real events, sometimes you're trapped with the mundane nature of real life. You have Sons of Anarchy that is very over the top and campy and ridiculous, and we all love it for that. And then you have a movie like this that's appealing to that same crowd, but is bound by how things actually happened in real life, where most of what these guys were doing is just hanging out, talking about how awesome it is being in a motorcycle group. Austin Butler gives a good performance, but I found his character to be very dull. He's just the edgy guy because he's edgy and he's cool and he's edgy. And then you had Jodie Comer here, who gives, I would imagine, a very true to form performance of the accent and the dialect of this era of the United States, or this area of the United States. But I found her annoying. Like, her accent felt so over the top and just so like gratingly East Coast that, I don't know, she just grated on my nerves. And again, that's not her fault. I think that she does great as an actress. Maybe she does too good of a job. But there was something about the way that she talked throughout most of this film where I was just like, oh my God, shut up. And I hate being that way because, we all have accents that bother us for some reason. Like, there's some people that are from the East Coast that think that the Southern accent is obnoxious. And then you got some people that think that the Boston East Coast side of things is obnoxious. You got some people that are like up in the Minnesota era that think that that's weird. We all have weird ways that we talk, weird dialects, weird inflections. But there was just something about the way that she talked that just, every time she was on screen, I was like, stop, move on, please. So yeah, a movie that I was thinking was probably going to be near the top of my list for the year, and it's not going to come anywhere close. Coming at number 4 is a film that's probably at the top of this list for most people this year, and that is Joker Folie à Deux. Maybe I pronounced that right this time. Joker 2. Yeah. This would be number 1 for me if I expected to love this, but ever since they announced it, I always kind of had a bit of an eyebrow raised to it. The first Joker never felt like a film that needed a follow-up. It felt like a follow-up, if anything, might take away from the original film with just the nature of that movie. When they announced it was going to be a musical, immediately my red flags were soaring because I'm not a musical guy, and I'm just wondering, like, what the fuck? Like, how do you follow up that first film with a musical? What does that even mean? Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn, I was kind of mixed on. I was like, this seems like a perfect fit, but also Margot Robbie just embodies that character so perfectly. Like, what can she bring that we haven't seen from Margot Robbie? So I never had my expectations too high for this movie. And yet this movie still managed to absolutely decimate my expectations in a negative way, pretty much all across the board. You have a film that, I've heard explanations for. I've heard people try to frame it in a certain way that it's brilliant. This is Todd Phillips is playing the role of the Joker, and all of us are the victims of the joke. It's so subversive. You have Quentin Tarantino that came out that loved the film, and all the reasons that he gave is like, I love it because it basically just pisses everybody off, and it says fuck you to the studio, and fuck you to Joker fans, and fuck you to comic book fans, and fuck you to Warner Brothers, and okay. I actually agree with all of that, but I don't celebrate it in the way that Quentin does. To me, it's actually annoying. So those people that love this, like my buddy Rudy, like, of course, my buddy Brian Lomax loved this movie because it stars the Joker. I get it. I respect all of that. My perspective is, you watch this film, and while it is absolutely beautifully made, it is shot wonderfully, there's amazing cinematography on display, the musical numbers and everything have a lot of artistry at play with the choreography and the way that they visualize and transition everything. Of course, you have really good actors here with, Joaquin Phoenix following up his Oscar-winning role, and I don't think that he does worse in this movie. I think he's got a lot less to work with, but he's still very good. The issue is, by the end of it, the movie feels like it's just absolutely devoid of a purpose to exist, and absolutely, in fact, takes away from that original film for me. I always say that like remakes and reboots don't really affect original films for me ever, but a bad sequel can, because I will always watch that original film and remember, oh yeah, but it leads to that. That's the canonical follow-up. That's the canonical ending there. And it always is going to grate on me a little bit. So you have everything that we had in the first film, and then it leads to this, and it just makes me go, why? Why did we do this? And we spent a gargantuan amount of money on it. I think this was $200 million plus, where the first film was like a fraction of that. And so, yeah, there's a bit of a tone to the last couple of years of movies that have this annoyance with me, where you have Hollywood that's in like this very fragile state after COVID, after these strikes, where they're like, Hollywood might just cease to exist in a few years. We're not profitable and we're losing money hand over fist. Well, then why do you want me to celebrate when you spend $200 million on a film that basically is intended to piss everybody off? And we have other films that I'll talk about when I get into the rest of the year that's just like, it almost seems like money laundering schemes at this point. Like, you spent $300 million on what? So I'm just of the opinion that this movie is frustrating as an existence. It was $200 million to pay off the director and the lead actors, these monstrous paydays, to basically say fuck you to everybody that liked the first film. And while some people will look at that and say, that's really interesting, I'm kind of intrigued at why a filmmaker would do that, and that makes me like the movie more because it stands out as odd. And I get that. For me, it just annoys me. I don't appreciate when a filmmaker is cashing tens of millions of dollars as a paycheck to tell me to go fuck myself. So my way of returning that favor is saying, go fuck yourself. Your movie sucked, and it's really low on my list. Coming at number 3 is Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. Now, I've been on record numerous times. I am not a Tim Burton fan. There is less than 5 movies that I have seen of him that I enjoy. And the original Beetlejuice is one of those 5 films. So when they finally said that, yes, we are in fact making a sequel, after that being rumored and talked about and speculated about for decades, I actually started to get a little excited because I'm a big Michael Keaton fan. And once you started to hear more about this and see the cast that was added into it, and we got so many returning cast members, some of the new people like Jenna Ortega are people I really enjoy. You see the first trailer, and they're very much staying in the spirit of that original film with the stop motion effects and some of the practical effects. And you're like, oh my God, this is cool. This is not what I feared it would be. This feels like Tim Burton kind of getting back to his roots and really celebrating what was so great about that original film. So I got very, very excited for this movie, which was out of character for me. Took the whole family to go see it, and I thought it was fine. It was a movie that I thought was just okay. I don't know if it was even good enough for me to now include that in my 5 or so movies that I enjoy. The problem with this movie is that it's enough ideas for a Beetlejuice 2 and a Beetlejuice 3 all crammed into one film. So you have the whole storyline with Beetlejuice trying to come back for Lydia Dietz. You have the storyline of Lydia Dietz's daughter, who is very much in the spirit of her mother and just lost in the world. You have a storyline with this boy that she meets down the street. You have the storyline with Monica Bellucci, who is Beetlejuice's ex-wife, who is suddenly stitched back together and revived and out for revenge. And I'm probably forgetting 1 or 2. And the movie is constantly battling for screen time among these ideas and these subplots, which sucks because every individual one is interesting, but none of them feel fully cooked. And by the end of it, even the ones that are the most interesting of the film feel like they are shortchanged and just quickly resolved and tossed away because we got to get to these other things. Like the subplot with Lydia's daughter, Jenna Ortega, and this boy across the street, out of nowhere, it gets really interesting. And I was like, whoa, as soon as that kind of showed where they were going with things, I immediately got 10 times more interested in what I was watching. You have the storyline with Monica Bellucci, who has such a cool intro in this movie and then just fucks off into the background for like an entire hour and then just randomly shows up in the third act and is quickly dispatched from the movie after that. So it really bummed me out that they had so much just overstuffed storyline in here when very easily they could have just split some of this up and had a Beetlejuice and then already had Beetlejuice like greenlit, ready to go with most of a script. So I liked it. Overall, as a family, we had fun with our theater experience. I will probably watch this sometimes after I watch the original Beetlejuice. Not that I watch that all the time, but it was incredibly disappointing for how excited I ended up getting before it came out. Coming in at number 2 is going to be Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. And this was such a massive disappointment that I actually forgot this thing even came out this year until I looked at my list of films that I watched. I was like, oh my God, that felt like it was definitely 2023. Ghostbusters Afterlife, I was such a massive fan of. To me, it was one of those reboots that really baits with nostalgia that actually got the mix right. It was very surprisingly emotional with what they did with the story, with how they followed up with Harold Ramis's character in spite of his death and how they worked that into the plot. And I thought they set it up in a really nice spot where, you know, we've played in nostalgia. We've got all the old school fans kind of interested, hopefully. Now it's time to move on to new stories in a new era. And then you have Frozen Empire that, very similar to Beetlejuice, felt like it had enough story and enough ideas for at least 2 movies, maybe even 3. This thing is even more overstuffed than Beetlejuice. And so, again, you have a film that I was massively excited for because I love the franchise and I was very much a fan of the last film. And every single thing that they did that I liked felt like it was cut off at the knees because we had to spend screen time on these 4 or 5 other things that weren't nearly as interesting or aren't nearly as developed because there's too much to do here. And it also felt like they didn't even know what to do with all their characters. Like, we're trying to balance the screen time with this new cast with Paul Rudd and the old Ghostbusters even. I mean, you've got Finn Wolfhard, who basically is told to go play with Slimer the entire film. They had no idea what to do with his character. And that's just a really big bummer. I hate that as a follow-up when you get one of these really well-done, kind of nostalgia-fueled reboots where they're like, okay, we did this really good movie, and now that we can't rely on nostalgia and just repeating things from the past, we have no idea what to do. That's a big disappointment. And I don't know where that came from. You had Jason Reitman direct the legacy sequel to his father's film in the last one. And in this one, him and the writer swapped, where he wrote it and the writer directed it. Maybe that was all that it was. But, I mean, you got the stepfather storyline with Paul Rudd. That's just, a quarter measure. You got McKenna Grace and her friendship with this ghost that some people swear up and down was like this gay awakening for the character. I didn't quite read into it that much, but who am I to say what their intentions were? That feels completely undercooked. You have the whole theme of the Frozen Empire, this gigantic malevolent force that's going to take over New York and put it in a bed of ice that is relegated basically to only being relevant to the third act. And everything about this movie feels undercooked and overstuffed, which was a massive disappointment. So for a movie that felt like it was a shoe-in to, theme of this list, to be near the top of my list by the end of the year, I actually forgot it came out this year because it was just that forgettable. But easily my most disappointing film experience of 2024 is M. Night Shyamalan's Trap. Now, M. Night is such a tricky bastard because for as many movies as he's given that I love, some of my favorite films of all time, he has just as many films that have completely fallen on their face and are some of the worst films I've ever seen. And he's in this stage of his career now where he is cranking out a movie like every single year, it seems. And he is so extreme hit or miss with them. You'll have a movie that comes out that's like, oh, that was great. And then the very next one feels like it's an absolute dud. And I think part of the problem is that he's doing so many films now that even the movies with these great premises, that he's not able to focus on them enough. Like, I thought that Knock at the Cabin had a lot of things going for it, and it just kind of ended up being forgettable. But with Trap, the teaser came out and, immediately frames everything as, oh, it's a movie with Josh Hartnett where he takes his daughter to this concert and there's a serial killer at large and they're using this concert as a trap. And then the reveal at the end of the teaser is, oh, Josh Hartnett's actually the killer. That's fucking cool. That is a great concept. You say that on paper, and I'm immediately like, take my money now. That sounds awesome. And it was so simple that it felt like there's no way M. Night can fuck this up. Like, this isn't going to have some weird supernatural thing. It's not going to have probably not going to have some massive swing for the fences twist that he really gets in trouble with sometimes. It feels like it's just a simple little thriller concept that he can execute really well if he just dials in and focuses. And when I saw this movie, it disappointed me and frustrated me so much that I actually turned my spoiler review into a full-blown roast of the movie. Because while Josh Hartnett is still one of those people that I think is just such an untapped talent in Hollywood, and hopefully he's starting to kind of get his flowers finally. And while there are some good aspects of the movie as far as executing this idea and using this concert as a setting and everything like that, the movie just relies on absolute contrived bullshit so frequently and so to an extreme that I could not take this fucking thing seriously past 30 minutes. I mean, look, a movie has to stick to bullshit oftentimes because, again, like I was talking about with, what was it, the Bikeriders, real life does not obey by the rules of movies. And so oftentimes if you stick to reality, it can be boring. It can be very much a restriction on the entertainment. And so sometimes you have to have some bullshit happen to get the character from point B to point C. But my God, it's like every 5 minutes, this movie pulls the most contrived bullshit out of its ass to get Josh Hartnett from point A to point B, from point B to point C, from point C to point D. Nothing past the first 15 minutes of this movie is even a shred of believable. And it's not the type of movie that can get away with that because it's still a very grounded and realistically toned film. This is not something that is going for shoot 'em up levels of camp and ridiculousness where it's oh, being silly and full of bullshit is the exact point. That's the source of the entertainment. No, it is not. And so every single time you have his character get into a little pinch where he has to pull a fast one to be able to dodge the cops or to get into a restricted area or get his daughter on stage for some reason, every single way that he's able to achieve this is such extreme bullshit that I could not go along for the ride for this movie. And it actually started to piss me off because it was flat out just insulting my intelligence all the way through to the final frame. And you have a third act in this movie that just goes so out of bounds with bullshit that it was infuriating. You have a point where Josh Hartnett's character is in a limo with the most famous pop star ever as far as the rules of this film. And they're surrounded by people, surrounded by fans that are all peeking through the fucking windows of the car. And they all know that she's in there. And she gets out. Oh my God, the killer's in there. And he's able to just fucking teleport out of that limo, change clothes, and end up in the crowd incognito with no explanation whatsoever. That's just one of the dozens of things that this movie does. So by the end of it, this was the movie that probably pissed me off the most because I don't like having my intelligence insulted by a movie. And this one does it just every 5 minutes. So could have been a very easy, massive win for M. Night. And this movie frustrated me on the level where I don't even know if I'm going to be able to be excited for the next M. Night film. But knowing him, he's probably going to pull off something where he's going to deliver this awesome sounding premise. And I'm going to go, you son of a bitch. I'm in. Well, that's it, guys. That is my most disappointing films of 2024. Coming out tomorrow will be my most surprising films of 2024, and then we will get into probably the horror films, then the worst and the best, and the overall ranking of the year. So look forward to seeing all of those in the near future, guys. Please like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss all of those. You're going to click over here for all of my 2024 new release reviews, and up here I will put a playlist of all of my end of the year rankings of 2024 that'll get filled up as the week goes on. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.